You've heard the story. A warrior people from the east, riding in from the steppes of Central Asia. They conquered Anatolia. They gave it their language, their customs, and in time their name. But what if I told you that story was never written in the blood? Because here's the paradox no one wants to talk about. Modern Turks speak a Turkic language, but their DNA, it barely whispers of Central Asia. Only 9%, maybe 12% in some regions. The rest? A tangled, beautiful mess of Balkan, Greek, Caucasus, Persian, and ancient Anatolian strands. It's like discovering that your reflection isn't your ancestors, that the tongue in your mouth came by conquest, but the bones in your body never moved. We're not talking about forgotten villages or remote tribes. We're talking about a nation of 85 million people, living under a name that doesn't match their genome. This isn't a political debate. This is cold, unchanging code, the kind buried so deep, even history books can't rewrite it. And here's what it says. The people of Turkey are mostly not from the steppes. They're not genetic descendants of Genghis Khan's horsemen. They're the children of the soil they stand on. A people older than empires, speaking a language that once belonged to someone else. So what do you call an identity built not on inheritance, but on inheritance interrupted? And if most Turks aren't genetically Turkic, then who were the ones who carried this land through 15,000 years of storms, migrations, and empires? Because the answer isn't in the flags. It isn't in the myths. It's buried deeper, in limestone graves, in the jawbone of a hunter who walked this land before farming even existed, in DNA that refused to die. And that story, the one hidden in ancient Anatolian bones, is waiting to be unearthed. The bones were always there, just beneath the fields, the cities, the prayers, waiting. And when the earth cracked open at Kumtepe, it didn't reveal a warrior or a nomad. It revealed a woman, buried with care, thousands of years before the word Turk had ever been spoken. But it wasn't her burial that shocked the world. It was her blood, because her DNA didn't point east. It pointed west, all the way to early farmers in Europe, even closer, to modern-day Sardinians who never left their island. She wasn't some lost branch. She was the root. This woman, and others like her, tell a forgotten truth. Anatolia wasn't a place people passed through. It was the place they began from. The first wheat sown in Europe came from here. The first villages built here. The first language that whispered structure into human thought may have passed through these very hills. We call Anatolia a crossroads, but that's wrong. It was the engine. For thousands of years, its people didn't vanish. They evolved. They built Troy. They traded with Babylon. They buried their dead beneath stones marked with symbols we still don't understand. And yet their name is gone. Their face replaced. We speak of Turks, Greeks, Romans. But what about her? Her DNA still lives. Not just in the bones, but in the blood of millions. Yet no monument bears her name. No national anthem sings of her people. So if the first Anatolians never left, how did they become invisible? Where did their identity go? Who took their place? The answer wasn't in a flood of new people. It arrived in a moment. A single year, 1071. The Battle of Manzikert. That's where it began. Not with blood, with language. The Seljuk Turks didn't bring millions. They brought an idea, a name, a sound that reshaped a continent. They swept into Anatolia, not as a wave of DNA, but as a whisper that would soon drown out every older tongue. Islam followed, then Turkish, then a silence. The people were still Anatolian, still carrying the bones, the blood, the buried memories. But now, they were called something else. Turks. And here's the fracture. The DNA didn't follow the story. There's no overwhelming Central Asian signature in modern Turkey. Just a faint echo, a distant shadow. 9%, maybe 12%, barely a trace in the mother lines. Softer still in the West. What spread wasn't genes. It was power, language, law, prayer. And it wasn't the first time. Centuries earlier, the Persians had done it. They walked into hearts without stepping into homes. Their myths became yours, even if their blood never did. This wasn't a migration. It was a rebranding. The elite rode and on horseback, but it was the villagers who changed. Not their DNA. Their identity. That's the haunting twist. Turkishness, as we know it, wasn't inherited. It was learned. Passed down not in blood, but in memory. So if the blood never really came from the East, if the steppe gave the name, but not the face, then who were the people who did shape that face? Because someone left deeper fingerprints. Stronger ones. Invisible, but still in every Turkish genome. They didn't come from Central Asia. They came from the West. And what they left behind wasn't myth. It was buried, bone-deep proof of an empire that fell, but never left. Because beneath the hills of Anatolia, beneath mosques, highways, olive groves, lie Christian graves, Byzantine graves, and in them the silence louder than any battle. The mothers of that empire are still here, their DNA still speaking, and what it says is simple. They were not replaced. Scientists opened these graves expecting diversity, invasions, migrations, maybe a trail of steps in the dust. But they found something else. Greek DNA, Balkan DNA, Mediterranean haplogroups so local, so deeply rooted. They barely changed from the Roman age to the Seljuk. No Central Asian markers. None. The orthodoxy faded. The churches turned to ruins. The call to prayer rose where the cross once stood. But the bones stayed. So who were these people? They worshipped in Greek. They dressed in silk. They lit candles to saints. And now, their descendants walk through the same streets, under a different name. Turk. What if the very people the Turks were taught to replace are their own great-grandmothers? What if the fall of Byzantium wasn't the end, but a quiet continuation? A people absorbed, a culture buried, a bloodline never broken. So now we ask, if Greek and Balkan DNA still lives in Turkish veins, then what does that make the Greeks? And what does that make the Armenians? The Kurds, the neighbors who became strangers, even though their cells still rhyme with your own? Because maybe the real walls weren't built by blood. Maybe they were built by memory. But there's still one more piece missing. There's a lineage that didn't pray to Rome, didn't come from the steppe, and didn't speak Greek or Persian. And yet, it's the closest genetic match of all. It's the closest match, and the most painful, because when the DNA is stripped bare, when the names, the flags, the wars are all peeled away, what's left is something uncomfortable. Siblinghood. The Turkish genome doesn't draw hard lines. It blends. It overlaps. It bends over borders like rivers ignoring maps. Kurds, Armenians, Greeks. 3 names, each soaked in tension, each tied to identity, to wounds, to politics. But in the genes, they sit side by side. Same ancestral branches, shared immune markers, identical haplogroups. They are not enemies. They are echoes of each other. And it's not just under microscopes. It's on the plate. It's in the music. It's the way baklava shows up on both sides of a border. And both sides call it theirs. It's the folk dresses stitched in red and gold. The circle dances with names that change, but steps that don't. How do you keep calling someone other when your grandmother's blood is singing the same song? Science didn't uncover this to divide. It uncovered it because the genome remembers things history tried to forget, that we were never that far apart. But the heartbreak is, we built entire stories on being different, on being separate, on being chosen. And now those stories are cracking, because the data says, there's no clean line. There never was. And just when you think this is the twist, just when you accept that your rivals might be your kin, another shadow appears, a different legacy, one that didn't blur quietly into the crowd, because not every influence faded, not every invader disappeared into the blood. One left a trail so loud, it still pulses across borders. You can barely see it, but it's there, a ghost in the genome, a faint signal from the steppe. For centuries, it was told in legend, the riders from the east, Oghuz Turks, draped in leather, speaking of wolves and sky gods, nomads who crossed deserts and mountains, and brought with them a new identity. But when we dig through the DNA, the myth shrinks. Central Asian markers, real, yes, but quiet. CEO3Q flickers in the blood. not floods. And yet, in certain corners, in places like the offshore village near Ankara, the ghost is louder. There, oral history speaks of steppe ancestry, pride in a distant homeland, stories passed down from fireside to field. And the science, almost shyly, nods back. East Asian haplotypes rise higher than anywhere else. The DNA, for once, agrees with the stories. But zoom out, and the echo fades again. Across most of Anatolia, the Turkic imprint is barely a shadow, drowned in layers of Mediterranean, Balkan, Persian, and Neolithic Anatolian code. What survived wasn't the blood. It was the memory. A language, a flag, a sense of origin stronger than the evidence behind it. And yet, isn't that the power of story? That it can live on louder than genetics? That a whisper from a steppe can become a national anthem? Still, among all the groups that touched Anatolia, the steppe was never the deepest. Because buried even deeper, past the empires, the tribes, the myths, is another influence. One you wouldn't expect. One that shouldn't even be there. But is stronger, louder, older, and unexpected. Because the deepest fingerprints in Turkish DNA aren't from Central Asia at all. They're from Rome, from Persia, from places we don't normally call home, but whose bloodlines run like hidden rivers beneath Anatolian soil. At Sagalassos, the graves speak again. This time, not of Greeks or steppe riders, but of women whose maternal lines stretch back to the Italian peninsula, to Persian highlands, to the southern arc of empire. Roman DNA, in the heart of Anatolia. Not invaders, residents, because back then, the capital of Rome wasn't Rome anymore. It was Constantinople, and Constantinople was Anatolia. The empire didn't just rule this land. It grew from it. Its emperors, its soldiers, its mothers, and the genetic code remembers. It remembers the Persian governors who ruled before the legions came, the traders who walked the Silk Road west, carrying not just silks and spices, but families. It remembers the Latin inscriptions carved into temple stones, just a few steps away from Hittite ruins. It remembers a city where you could taste Persian pomegranates, in a Roman marketplace, while hearing prayers in Greek. These weren't just empires. They were fusion machines. Cultures didn't collide. They combined. And through it all, Anatolia wasn't a passenger. It was the vessel. The crossroads turned crucible. For language, for ritual, for blood. And here's the twist most forget. Even after Rome fell, after the legions vanished and the borders collapsed, Anatolia kept reshaping Europe. Through exiles, through migrations, through the long shadows of empire. But we haven't reached the final architect yet. There's still one more player. Not a conqueror, but a bridge. A genetic echo that doesn't just tie Turkey to its past. It connects it to Europe's present, but not just through memory, through blood. Because while Turkey absorbed waves of identity from east and west, there came a moment when it gave some back. The Ottoman Empire wasn't just a power. It was a presence. It ruled deep into Europe, Hungary, Romania, the Balkans, not for decades, for centuries. And in those centuries, something unusual happened. Genetic flow reversed, not into Anatolia, but out of it. East Central European genomes still carry it. A trace, a thread, Turkish DNA, tucked into the heart of villages hundreds of miles away. And it fits the timeline perfectly. The admixture? Roughly 18 generations ago, right when the Ottoman banners flew high over the Danube. It wasn't mass colonization. It was slow absorption. A merchant here, a soldier there, a child born from a union that crossed languages, faiths, flags. And it left more than DNA. It left food, stuffed grape leaves, strong coffee, spices that whisper Istanbul in kitchens far from Turkey. It left music, minor scales that drift from Turkish strings into Balkan ballads. It left words borrowed, bent, and buried in Slavic tongues. But the real surprise? This wasn't just empire spreading power. It was identity flowing outward. A reversal. A rare one. Because usually, identity comes from the center, gets absorbed by the edges, and dies there. But this time, Anatolia pushed back. And while Europe was changing, so was Turkey. Back home in Anatolia, something strange was unfolding. Not in borders, not in empires, but inside the blood. An unexpected pattern, a twist. Not for migration, for marriage. And that marriage was often to family. Inside modern Turkey, there's a secret most don't speak aloud. It's not written on passports, but it's there in the genome. Half the people sampled carry signs of close blood unions, first cousins, sometimes closer. This isn't a historical footnote. It's a living pattern, and it leaves a mark. Long stretches of identical DNA, runs of homozygosity, a quiet clue that says, this population has been folding inward for generations. But here's the contradiction. Genetic isolation doesn't mean simplicity. It doesn't mean purity. It means uniqueness. Because trapped within that closeness was a world of variation that went unnoticed, unshared. When Turkish genomes were scanned in full, scientists found something strange. Rare coding variants, thousands of them, and many were new, unseen in global databases, unknown even in neighboring lands, preserved like seeds in a sealed jar. This wasn't a result of conquest, not of migration. It came from tradition, marriage patterns, village structures, communities that turned inward and stayed that way. And what they created was not uniformity, it was distinction. A genome that is now studied not just for history, but for medicine. Because in this genetic landscape, there are clues to disease, to resilience, to inheritance patterns only visible when bloodlines spiral tight. But still, this uniqueness isn't ancient. It's recent, shaped in the last few hundred years. And yet, underneath this recent twist, there's a deeper surprise. Because when scientists went looking for the oldest Turkish DNA match, they didn't find it in Anatolia, or in the steppe, or the Caucasus. They found it on an island, a people who never called themselves Turkish, who never converted, who never migrated, but who carried the most ancient Anatolian signature still intact. And they're not in Turkey. They're on an island, Sardinia, quiet, isolated, floating off the coast of Italy, a place better known for goats and stone towers than for holding the key to Anatolia's deepest past. But when scientists compared ancient Anatolian genomes, especially those from Neolithic sites like Kumtepe, they found something no one expected. A perfect match. Not with modern Turks, not with Kurds, Greeks, or Armenians, but with Sardinians. Thousands of years ago, Anatolia sent out farmers, pioneers. They crossed into Europe, and some ended up in Sardinia, where they stayed. And because that island was cut off from empire, from conquest, from war, those genes barely changed. Generation after generation, Sardinia froze time, preserved the Anatolian genome like a relic, untouched, undiluted. So today, when you look at a Sardinian shepherd, you might be looking at something impossible, a living echo of the first Anatolians, not in Turkey, not under the Turkish flag, but west across the sea, in a language no Anatolian ever spoke. And that is the emotional twist no DNA test prepares you for. Modern Turks inherited the name. They carry the language. But the genome, the oldest one, it lives elsewhere. It's a reminder that identity doesn't always stay home, and that what's Turkish isn't always where you expect to find it. But if the purest Anatolian bloodline is offshore, then what exactly happened here? Who stayed? Who mixed? Who renamed the land? And if the ancient seed traveled west, then where did the modern story take root? Because now, with every ancestry chart redrawn, we face the final question. What does it mean when the oldest Anatolian blood no longer lives in Anatolia? What does it mean to belong to a place your DNA left behind? Because if Sardinia carries the untouched past, then what exactly is modern Turkey? Who are the people that stayed? The answer is not simple. It's not pure. It's not single. It's layered, like sediment on an ancient ruin. Neolithic farmers, Hittite kings, Roman citizens, Byzantine monks, Seljuk warriors, each named a chapter, each faced the costume change. But underneath, the body stayed. The genome stayed. That's the hidden story in every Turkish cell. Not a clean slate. A palimpsest. Language changed. Faith changed. Flags changed. But the blood? The blood whispered through it all. It didn't vanish. It adapted. And now we see it clearly. Turkish identity isn't built on a single origin. It's built on survival. It's not the voice of one people. It's the memory of many, speaking through one language, wearing one name, but carrying the genetic echoes of a dozen civilizations. Language is the paint. DNA is the canvas. So when we say Turkish, we're really saying Anatolian and steppe and Mediterranean and Mesopotamian. We're saying empire and village, migration and memory. We're saying, this isn't the story of conquest. It's the story of continuity. And maybe we didn't erase the past. Maybe we're still wearing its skin. But this is only one identity, one puzzle piece. Because if Turkish DNA rewrote everything we thought we knew, then what will Armenian DNA reveal?